right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I am here today with Vic Ferrari. He is a former retired NYPD detective turned author. He has 5 books out. We're going to hear a little bit about those. How are you doing today, Vic?
Hey, Courtenay, thank you for having me on your show. I'm doing great.
Awesome, glad to hear it. So for my audience, tell them a little bit about how you got into being an NYPD detective and then how you became an author.
Sure. I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York City kid, grew up in a lower middle class family. I always wanted to be a New York City police officer and later detective. I grew up watching the Rockford Files and Dirty Harry and the French Connection. And my parents really wanted me to go to college or at least try to get into the trades, like become an electrician or a plumber. But I knew what I wanted to do by 5 years old, and that's all I wanted to do and aspired to do. By 21, I got hired. I went through the New York City Police Academy. I had a wonderful 20-year career. I worked in various plainclothes units like pickpockets and anti-crime and grand larceny auto. And I worked in Manhattan North Narcotics. I was an undercover for a brief period of time. I was an investigator in narcotics. I also, my last 10 years, I was a detective in the NYPD's auto crime division, where I worked on stolen car rings, chop shops, exporting stolen vehicles out of the country, changing vehicle identification numbers for resale, identity theft. And if we were working on a crew, if you ever saw the movie Heat, if we were working on a crew and they were talking about murders, they got into murders, well, guess what? We were going with whatever they were involved in. So it's not like I was a homicide detective, but if, you know, we came up with something with a homicide, we would run with it. So after I retired, I moved down to sunny Florida. My friends used to tell me, you tell a great story, you got all these stories, you should really write them down. And I did. And I started writing about 6 years ago. It's worked out for me. I've written 5 books, 4 of which are about the New York City Police Department. They're all fun. It's my books tend to be upbeat. There is some dark stuff in there, but it's about the ridiculous things you would never expect that would go on in a major police department. The characters, the cops, and interesting criminals, the scams, the schemes, backstabbing bosses, just things you would never imagine goes on in America's largest police department.
Wow. So I'm curious, how long were you with the NYPD?
20 years.
Wow. So did you see changes in the city, in how the department was structured and how things were run?
Yeah, sure. When I first got hired, the mayor of New York was a guy by the name of Ed Koch. And Ed Koch was a good guy. He liked cops. He didn't really understand crime. The cops loved him because he supported the police, but he was kind of soft on crime. And he also gave the cops raises, so they liked him. But New York basically was in a funk. Crime was up, and it wasn't really a desirable place to live. When Dinkins left, we got another mayor, the late, great David Dinkins. Dinkins just didn't acknowledge crime, and New York really went downhill. And New York needed a change, and desperate times call for desperate measures. And New Yorkers, especially in the city, tend to vote Democratic, but enough was enough. And Rudy Giuliani became mayor. And Rudy was great for New York. I mean, there's a lot of cops that don't like Rudy because he didn't give us the raises they thought they deserved. But here's the thing about Rudy. If you worked, he took care of you. In other words, so if you wanted to make an arrest or put in the extra work, you'd get paid the overtime. And also Rudy made sure that the district attorney's office enforced the law. And he also went after quality of life crimes, which nowadays gets looked the other way. But what happens is when you grab people for quality life crimes and run them for a warrant check, say you stop somebody that's drinking a beer. Well, I guess I could let that go. Well, if you give them a summons and do a warrant check and come to find out that the person's wanted for a burglary 2 years ago. He's off the street. So now you don't have to worry about him running around committing additional crimes. After Rudy left, we had a guy by the name of Mike Bloomberg. Bloomberg, I really don't agree with politically, but I will say this about him during my time there. He did keep the Giuliani model as far as enforcing crime. So for that, in that respect, he was good for New York. I mean, it looks like it's a 3-ring circus up there now. I'm glad I'm retired and writing books.
What do you see about what's going on there now?
What it appears to me is you have a mayor that just doesn't acknowledge crime. He basically pats the criminals on the head. I mean, he's doing ridiculous things like closing Rikers Island, and now they're going to keep Rikers Island open, and now they're going to hire private security with some of the worst criminals in the city. Good luck with that. A lot of the DAs, the Bronx was always somewhat soft on crime, the district attorney there. Now you got another one in there that's not really tough on crime. I don't agree with this bail reform thing where you commit a crime and you're back out in the street in 15 minutes. I mean, you know, when you were a kid and your parents punished you and they sent you to bed, if they let you out 15 minutes later, you didn't really learn the lesson. So if you get picked up for a gun and you got to spend 6 months on Rikers before you get your 1.5 to 3 upstate, you'll think twice about doing it.
For sure. Action should have consequences.
Sure.
Yeah. And when they don't, there's no incentive not to commit crimes. So
exactly.
Yeah. And in some ways, I think they're being incentivized. I heard something about like where they're being paid not to commit a crime.
There's something, you know, I don't know everything about it, but you're right. There
Sure.
was something where they're giving out gift cards or something if you promise not to get arrested. And I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but I did hear that. It's
Right?
ridiculous.
I was like, wait, how does this work? And can I get in on it? Like, do I tell them I plan to commit a crime and you're going to pay me? Right? I'm totally kidding, but I mean,
No, I get it. And I don't think you'd want to spend
you know?
15 minutes in the bullpen, which is the bullpen is that central booking where they keep the prisoners before they go upstairs. You call it the bullpen, like they're warming up.
Exactly. So then what made you, was it just time to retire? What made you retire at that time?
I really loved where I worked. I mean, I stayed in the same place my last 10 years and I really enjoyed it and found the work interesting. But it's one of those things in life, and it's sad. Everybody outlives their usefulness. You just do. And I'd like to think of myself as I was at the top of my game when I retired, but the supervisors were retiring or getting promoted and going on. And what I saw was the talent wasn't really being replaced. We were getting, and I hate to bash a group, but we were kind of getting, the millennials were coming up and the video game generation. And it just seemed to me where, you know, they'd hit a problem and they were too eager to take no for an answer. I mean, that's the whole thing of detective work. You call up somebody and say, yeah, listen, does that video camera, can I get the surveillance? Yeah, it doesn't work. Well, you know what? I'm going to take a ride over there and see if it really does. Because more often than not, you get no. The younger crowd tended to just take that answer over the phone. And like I said, like I write in my book, Grand Theft Auto, the writing was on the wall for me and it was written in crayon. So it was time to go. You know, it was time to go. And I didn't want to be that guy, the bitter old man, which I retired at 41 years old. I didn't consider myself old, but when your counterparts are in their late 20s, everything's different. Music's different, opinions are different. So it was time to go. And working a 20-year career in law enforcement is like playing the roulette. Eventually the wheel is going to turn your way and you might get that 0 or 00 and put you in a bad situation. So it was just time to go, you know?
Right. And so what made you decide Florida and what made you decide to write these books?
Many years ago, I had a couple of friends that were a lot smarter than me and became electrical engineers and moved down to Florida and worked for the defense industry. And I used to come down in my 20s and look around and go to the beach. And I had a condo down here for a while. And I said to myself, you know what? I think maybe I want to come to Florida. It was between Florida and the New Jersey shore. And thank God I didn't go to New Jersey. Because on top of that, when I was retiring, I come to find out that New Jersey would have taken 6% of my pension. And I was like, I don't like Bruce Springsteen that much. So sunny Florida, here I come.
Awesome. And then how did you make so you were telling me before we got online, you were saying how anybody can write a book. I don't know that that's really all that true. I think that's a big undertaking. And what made you decide to do that and now write 5 of them?
Well, the first point is I do think anybody can write a book. I was lucky enough that I had a career that people find interesting. Now, if I was an air conditioned refrigeration guy, or I worked at Jiffy Lube and I wanted to write a book about my experiences, maybe the book might not take off. But I'm lucky enough that I wrote a book about a career and my experiences that people find interesting. There was Live PD. You've got all these crime shows, CSI. People are fascinated with police work and true crime. So I'm lucky enough that I have experience in a niche there that enables me to earn a second, have a second career. What got me into it was I just started writing my stories down. I would think of something funny. I'd be on the phone with one of my friends, and a guy that I talk to almost every week. Remember that guy? And I'm like, oh yeah, that would be a good story for my book. So sometimes it's funny when my friends call me up. They're like, don't put this in one of your books. I'm like, all right. So the two things I said, what I wanted to accomplish before I got into writing was I didn't want to get anybody divorced, and I didn't want to get anybody in trouble. So I changed the names, the dates, the locations, the ranks, and I'll move characters sometimes in and out of stories. But for the most part, my stories are based in truth, but I got to move things around a little bit.
Right. You were also saying that you do not like to write in chronological order.
I can't do it.
So why are you so opposed to it? And then what is your process in writing it out of chronology?
I'm not opposed to it. I just can't do it. It's I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to summer school at Catholic high school every year because I was terrible in math. And my parents tried everything. My mother would sit with me at the table for hours at a time. She had a tutor come over. I had to go to something called Mark Murphy, if whoever's out there knows what that is. I had to go out there with other idiots and try to get algebra and trig rammed through my head. And I wound up in summer school. There's things I'm good at and the things I'm not good at. Chronological order. The last thing I usually write in my books is the beginning of the book, the introduction. I struggle with that so much. I mean, the stories are there. I've got them. But as far as putting it all together, that's not my strength. So I think if I was to begin a book with, at the beginning, it was the best of times, the worst of times, just to begin at the beginning of the book, I'd never get it written. I do everything else, and then I'll come back to the end, and then I just kind of tie myself to the computer for days until I can get it to put it together.
Wow, that's awesome. So you found a system that works for you. Did you have any kind of guidance, or was there any blueprints you followed, or did you just start writing?
None whatsoever. No, I just started writing. And I have a good editor. That's very important if you're going to put a book together, especially if you're going to self-publish. You have to spend the money on an editor, and you have to spend the money on a book cover. I see people take shortcuts. You can have the greatest story in the world. If the book isn't edited correctly or the book cover is subpar, people do judge a book by its cover. They do.
Yeah.
Think about when you go, okay, think about when you're looking for a bottle of wine and you go.
I was just thinking that.
Okay. So you go, oh, look at this, and then you get home and you spend $20 on it. You're like, what did I just put in my mouth? I mean, but at the time it's an impulse buy because the bottle looks so good, you know what I mean? Or the name resonates with you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like Circus Olay, or you know what I mean? Or there's that wine freak show where they've got like the carnival going on in the background. I can see you going, oh, look at this. And then you get home and you're like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I mean?
Totally. So tell me a little bit about your latest book. Let's start with there. And tell us a little bit about what it's about and what we might find most interesting about it. I, full disclosure, have not read these books yet. I was in the middle of a move, so.
Okay, so my latest book, I'll hold it up for the audience, called NYPD Law and Disorder. It's got a picture of a cop scratching his head. There seems to be a car accident, and there's a bad guy fleeing out of the back seat. That really happened in one of the stories in my books. NYPD Law and Disorder is about embarrassing moments, things that go wrong where you think everything's going right and it just turns to shit. The book, the first chapter of NYPD Law and Disorder is called Embarrassing Moments. And it starts off with, and this is the true story, I stop a car with three guys in the backseat of a cab. There's 4 kilos. I arrest them. I'm parading around the station house like I won the Stanley Cup. I'm holding up the kilos. My friends are congratulating me. I'm shaking hands. I'm getting pictures taken. I'm taking all these photos and everything. Later that night, I had to go down to the Bronx District Attorney's office, see a district attorney to file charges on these guys. Across the street from the courthouse is a newly built shopping mall with a food court. I'm like, oh, great. You know what? Because the food around there sucks. I'm going to get something good to eat. I go over to the food court. It's empty. I'm getting something to eat. I got to use the bathroom. So I said, oh, well, this bathroom's clean. It's brand new, right? So I go into the bathroom. It's empty. I'm like, great. I take off I'm in uniform, right? Full disclosure, I'm in uniform. I take off my gun belt. I hang the gun belt on the hook on the back of the bathroom stall. I drop my pants. I'm getting ready for liftoff. And the next thing I know, I hear the bathroom door kick open and there's screaming, and it's a bunch of teenagers got into the bathroom. They're hitting the hand dryers. They got the sinks going. I'm like, oh shit. I mean, yeah, I'm a cop in uniform, but I'm vulnerable right here, right? All of a sudden, all the roughhousing stops. I'm like, okay, maybe they left. Maybe they saw a pair of legs underneath the stall and it's time to knock this bullshit off, right? Something told me, you know what, Vic, get dressed. Just go. Just as I look up, I see a kid. He's in the next stall, standing on the toilet, reaching over the stall, trying to grab my gun belt. Yeah. So I jump up with one hand, trying to pull my pants up with one hand, and I grab him about the neck by the other, and I pull him. Well, when I pulled him over the bathroom stall, he latched onto my gun belt. So now I'm in the fight of my life with this teenager holding onto my gun belt with my pants just dropped out to the floor, right? So as I'm punching him, right, telling him, trying to convince him to let go of the gun belt, right, he lets it go. And now I'm trying to pull this fucker over the wall. His friends run into the next stall. And now I'm in a mad tug of war over those cheesy aluminum walls that separate you in the stall. Well, the thing winds up breaking and bucking, and they fall over into the next stall. I pull my pants up. They go running out, right? By the time I get my pants on, my gun belt on, right? I put myself together. I run out in the food court. There's like a 300-pound porter buffing the floor with one of those things you'd see in high school, like buffing the tile floor. So I run up to him. I go, whoa, 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 whoa. I go, did a bunch of teenagers just run out of here? He turns the machine off, looks up to this guy, burps, and tells me no. So what was I supposed to do at that point? Call the police on myself? I could just see the cops responding and me telling them story with a straight face. I'd be the laughing stock of the Bronx at that point. So in that chapter, Embarrassing Moments, it's things that happened to me early in my career where, most authors like to paint themselves as they're the smartest, they figured this out, they're the coolest. Right. I kind of shoot that down in my opening chapter, my latest book, about some things that went wrong. There's another story about me as a rookie cop calling internal affairs on myself. And a captain showed up and goes, what are you, out of your fucking mind? Like, why would you call those rat bastards on yourself? There's a whole story behind that. And so NYPD Law and Disorder's got a lot of stories of things that went wrong.
Wow, awesome. I love the title. I'm actually on a podcast usually once a week. I haven't been, as I've been moving, but it's called Law and Disorder.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yep. We discuss politics because there's a lot of law and disorder in politics these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts on that, like what's been happening with the movement to defund the police and, a lot of those sentiments and actions.
Yeah, my opinion is it's a bunch of elitists that they're eroding the middle class, and the way to do it and the way to get to the middle class is to weaken the police departments, paint them as villains, defund them, humiliate them, get them to retire, loosen it up enough that they can pretty much do whatever they want. I mean, we saw that a year ago. Right. And the thing is, but long before all these riots started, a couple of years ago, I wrote in one of my books, they said the day that police in this country stop becoming proactive, I mean, that's not good. You want cops to be nosy. You want cops to be inquisitive. You want that cop that's driving by a 7-Eleven at 2 o'clock in the morning that sees a guy just kind of standing around standing around with no car and no purpose to stop and go, hey, everything okay? Check things out. I'm not saying to, you know, throw the guy on the floor and go to his pockets, but you might want to have a conversation with that guy. It's 2 a.m. There's no reason for him to be there. You know what I mean? But when you put blinders on cops, then you got a bunch of report takers that are going to show up after the fact. And then the onus is on you to defend yourself or your property.
Right. And that's not necessarily a good place for anybody.
Yeah.
That's bad news. So like this book you were telling me about, you talk a lot about the kinds of things that could go wrong or that did go wrong. What are you hoping people gain from that?
Cops are people too. Yeah, I love, and especially in this day and age when cops are villainized, they're doing this and they're doing this. Listen, this isn't 1950 something in the deep South where somebody doesn't get along with the local sheriff, so they're going to be found in the ditch at the end of town. All right. Cops are making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. They have mortgages. They have spouses they don't get along with. They have kids that don't listen to them. You know, if you really think the cops are going into work every day to make your life miserable, you're out of your mind. Now, don't get me wrong. There are bad apples. I get that, but that's with any job. I'm not a fan, never have been, never was, of summons cops or traffic cops. To me, that personality type, and I've seen it down here in Florida and I've seen it in New York, traffic cops tend to be the guys that never dated a pretty girl in school, got pushed around, or socially awkward. You know, it's sorry, mom, the law is the law. I got to give you a ticket. In my 20-year career, like the NYPD says that there's not a quota system for the rank and file members. Of course there is. You could deliver 3 babies, find America's Most Wanted, and if you didn't write a book of parking tickets, issue 10 moving summonses, which 3 of them had to be red lights, you were going to get a good talking to or a subpar evaluation. So there is pressure for cops to write tickets in New York. I know that much. I don't, you know, whatever they say. But traffic cops, it's almost like, I don't get it. If I pulled you over and you either said to me, I'm sorry, or gave me a bullshit excuse, and all your paperwork and your driver's license, and I don't care, you know, what social demographic you came from, what racial demographic, if your paperwork is together, you know, there's enough people that hate the police. I'm going to make another enemy. All right, just do me a favor, slow it down, or do me a favor, don't do a Bronx roll through the stop sign. You got to stop, okay? And just send them on their way. Right.
Yeah. So you were saying about the quota systems. At least you can speak to New York.
Yeah.
So just speak there. I think the big distinction that I see, you can speak more to personally the personalities and the types of people who gravitate towards that. But I think the big distinction as a citizen that I notice is the cops who, you know, are protecting the people from crimes are really protecting the citizens of their community. And they're supposed to be actually in their own community, so they're incentivized to do so. Whereas traffic cops, you know, really are working for the state, you know, the city, the state, but, you know, the term, the state. And that's very different. And that's not, to me, that's pretty antithetical to what the purpose of law enforcement is. It's supposed to be working to protect the people, not to, right? And I think that's,
oh, absolutely, yeah. And you know, and with these summons guys, I mean, there's no discretion whatsoever. I mean, it's just like there was a guy in our precinct many years ago, and he would pull over a city bus filled with people, and you'd see a city bus stopped with people on it, and he's giving the bus driver a ticket. I'm like, you know, this guy's got a commercial driver's license, right? You know, you just screwed this guy. Oh, he went through the light. I'm like, come on, man. He put garbage men, I mean, in the sanitation trucks. I'm like, what, are you kidding me? You know, he wasn't a likable guy, wasn't liked.
Right. Yeah, so I think that is the big distinction. And I think one of the things that we're seeing with this, you know, I think people don't realize, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, that, you know, when they say defund the police, they don't really mean get rid of the police. They kind of mean federalize the police, which is exactly the opposite of what we would want, and exactly the opposite of what's going to protect people in the communities.
Yeah, I don't want to get too political, but if
Yeah.
memory serves me correctly, during Obama's first term, he said he wanted to set up what's called a federal police force
Mm.
to be larger than anything that we have right now. Yeah, because then it'll be beholden to the federal government. I mean, there's got to be checks and balances with everything, politicians, including law enforcement. Listen, like I said before, you'll get bad apples from time to time that'll get through in law enforcement. It just happens. I worked with a couple of guys that went bad. And it's the saddest thing in the world. And it scares the hell out of you if you work in law enforcement. Like, how did that even happen? You know what I mean? Like, we would just sit around, like, after something bad would happen with somebody and like, what, did you notice this? Did you see this? And then, you say, well, this guy had problems with money and yeah, he was going through a divorce. And I mean, that's not to say everybody that doesn't have problems goes bad, but you're right. I mean, there's got to be checks and balances. You can't weaponize law enforcement. You just can't. It seems like that's what's happening right now, but I don't think it's a good thing.
No. Yeah, I definitely don't think it's good. And I think I agree with you. There has to be checks and balances. You said you worked with, you've witnessed firsthand some of them go bad, as your term. Do you think that there's, and I'm guessing it's probably a combination, but from your experience, does that happen like due to personal issues in their lives, or does it have to do with the system? Like, what do you think is causing some of that?
Both. So I know when I was retiring, right, they had lowered the standards quite a bit with things. And when I was retiring, like my last couple of years in, when I was 17, 18 years in, I would from time to time get phone calls from detectives in what's called the applicant investigation unit, which they're screening candidates to go into the police academy. And I would get a phone call and say, hi, Detective Ferrari, did you arrest Joe Smith in 1997 for a grand larceny auto? I'm like, let me get back to you. Let me get, the name sounds familiar. Let me pull the folder, I'll get back to you. And I, through the paperwork, I read it, I call the detective back. I'm like, yeah, he was driving around a stolen Cadillac, blah, 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 blah. Well, he says he was the passenger. And I said, no, I says, I remember it. The ignition was missing and he was the driver. So I was getting phone calls of guys with criminal records, because places like the Bronx, where they don't want to charge a felony because God forbid their conviction rate goes down if they can't get them to plea down. They don't want to go to trial on property crimes. They save that for murder and robbery and burglaries. But they'll do what's called D. They'll knock it down from a felony to a misdemeanor. So I was getting phone calls from detectives in the applicant investigation unit about guys I had arrested, 10 years before, 5 years before, for a variety of crimes that had been reduced to a misdemeanor that were trying to get in. Now, the second point is the guys that I saw go bad. Some were odd to begin with, and you're like, well, yeah, I never really liked that guy, or I never really trusted that guy. I think it's character. I really don't see if there's one thing the New York City Police Department makes no bones about is corruption. I write about that in my books. Like, you've got to be a complete moron to cross over. I mean, from the day you're hired, they tell you you're going to get fired. I mean, they don't stop in the police academy. They have internal affairs detectives and chiefs come in and show you videos of guys that have gone to jail, guys have thrown their careers away. They have special prosecutors come in tasked to tackle police corruption, who give out these fiery sermons like Pentecostal ministers. I mean, they really drill it into your head. Like, if you screw up, we're going to turn our back on you and we're going to prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. So it's 99% of the time, it's not a good cop that got himself involved in something and went bad. It's there to begin with. And they're there and they're gauging the system and they're just looking until they figure something out where they don't think they're going to get caught, or there's a risk reward that if I can pull this off, there'll be money to be made there. There was an NYPD boss and said there was a burglary in his home, and him and his wife was a cop too. And, they lost all this stuff at a burglary and everything and yada, yada, yada. They brought the wife and she said her engagement ring was stolen. Well, they bring her down to internal affairs 6 months later for an interview about something else. And she's wearing the engagement ring that she said that was taken in the burglary. there's way more to that story, but yeah, I mean, you'll see things. So, it's like, I think, these people are, no matter where they worked, they were going to screw up. It's just unfortunate. They got the keys to the kingdom. They got into something they could really cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, for sure. That's very unfortunate, but I think that makes sense that the proclivity was there to begin with, and then it was
absolutely
exacerbated by the circumstances and the environment. Why do you think there is so much corruption?
I don't think there is. I mean, when I was there wasn't. You got to remember, New York City went through a couple of big corruption scandals. One was in the 70s, where it just seemed to be a free-for-all, and that movie Serpico came out as a result of it. And yeah, they weren't paying the cops anything, and you had a lot of guys, and I'm not painting people that fought in Vietnam bad, but I know this to be true. When I first got hired, there were a lot of guys around from the Vietnam era, and not all of them, but a lot of them, and they weren't right. They were not right. And you've been in war, and you've seen all these terrible things that were going on over there, and anything goes. I guess we had a couple of big scandals in NYPD precincts, but for the most part, I never saw anybody take anything or do something that would get themselves arrested. But it happens. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Right. Yeah, and like anything, it's there in every field, unfortunately. Yeah. What would you say is the biggest transition from, you've written 5 books. Are they all very similar? Are they all very different? What have you learned from each one? Do you feel like they get better? Yeah.
I think, I'd like to think that I'm a better writer.
Yeah.
I mean, repetition is the mother of learning. It comes faster to me now. I've learned that if I come to a point in a book that I can't figure out, I leave it alone, and I'll come back a month, 2 months, 3 weeks, whatever, with a fresh pair of eyes. Or I might see something on television, or somebody might say something. I'm like, I can use that, or okay, this is going to make this work. Yeah, I think that the more I write, the better of a writer I become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, practice. What would you say or have been the biggest challenges you found? I'm curious, in both of your careers, what were the biggest challenges as a NYPD detective and as an author?
As an NYPD detective, okay, so I worked in the auto crime division, which falls under the umbrella of the Organized Crime Control Bureau. So I reported to an office every day in plain clothes. I sat around with other detectives, and we worked on cases, and we got tips. And sometimes, you're proactive, and sometimes you're looking for garden variety car thieves. Other times you're doing God's work. You're on a wiretap. You're following mobsters around. You're doing some very sensitive stuff. Okay. What I used to find challenging is with the New York City Police Department, they don't care what you're doing, what you're up to. They could care less. When there's a parade, the St. Patrick's Day parade, Times Square at New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving Day parade, the day before Thanksgiving Day parade, where they blow up those big balloons in Central Park. They, at the last minute, so say I came in at 7 o'clock in the morning, I made an arrest, and I'm not getting home till 11 o'clock at night. And as I'm walking out the door, hey, Ferrari, I get hit with a notification. Tomorrow, 6 a.m., you have to be, I lived in the Bronx, all the way out at Brooklyn because there's a newspaper strike. Be in uniform, and it's called hats and bats, which means helmets and nightstick. So they really, it's not like, like on television, won't take the day off, or they will run you into the ground. They will, especially in narcotics. Oh my God, with that buy and bust bullshit, they will wear you down to a nub. So you go out and you work 15 hours and you lock up 15 guys and you don't get home, and then you come in the next day, you get your coffee, you just want to catch up on your paperwork. Nope, it's like a pickup game of basketball. Go out with these guys and do buy and bust again, rinse and repeat. And when I worked in narcotics, you're always sick. You're always going to have a cold. Why? Because the scumbags you're arresting are always sick. You're arresting up homeless people that are out in the weather and the elements. So you get that funk in your hair and the smell. You're terrified of searching people because, especially in narcotics, with intravenous drug users, the last thing in the world you want to do is reach into someone's sock or pocket and get stuck with a hypodermic needle. You know, you don't want to get hepatitis C, you don't want to get AIDS. So I would always tell these guys, listen, I'm telling you right now, if you got a needle on you, tell me exactly where it is and take it out. I won't charge you with it. Really? If you're going to be a pain in the ass, I will. All right. So that was challenging as far as the way the NYPD would send you into things and they would just wear you down.
Yeah, that must have been scary too. I would imagine you don't know what you're coming up against, and that could be
Never.
Yeah, very
no 2 days are never the same. You could go into work with the mindset, I caught up on all my paperwork, nothing's going on, I'm gonna have a nice easy day, I'm gonna do a little bit of paperwork and I'm gonna get out of here, and the shit hits the fan and you're going 90 miles an hour in another direction.
Wow. You were talking about the needle. So I remember there was like this, I don't know, we were told, a few decades ago that in the clubs, they were running around with needles, like sticking needles into people.
I heard about that.
Right?
I remember hearing that.
And I was like essentially a kid, going into the clubs in the city, and I was so terrified that I would be like poked with a needle that had.
There was something like that going on. Yeah, I do remember that.
And I remember I would like keep my heavy winter coat on the dance floor.
Why even go out?
Scared. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're boogieing and you triple down goose.
Right. Yeah. Totally. So you're hearing your story about, that's really scary. You don't know where the needle is. What did you wear gloves? Like, how does that?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. But the gloves weren't like, now they have these gloves that are, I think they're made out of Kevlar that are stick resistant.
Right.
And I'm sure they've made them available by now, but back then, no, we didn't have that.
Wow. Yeah. So I can imagine. So, and as a writer, what are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered?
Well, especially since I'm retired, it's almost like a kid doing homework. There's days where I'll say to myself, all right, tomorrow I'm going to set aside 4 hours and I'm going to bang out 15 pages worth of material. And you sit there, and then the next thing I know, I find myself goofing around on Facebook, or, the dog is interfering with me and he won't leave me alone, which at some point he's going to make his debut in here. It's managing my time. I think I'm pretty good at managing my time, but it's definitely managing my time. The thing that I struggled with was, so I put my first book together and I've got a manuscript written, but it's not edited. And I never had the patience. I said, I bet on myself, because at first I was going to send it out to a bunch of different publishing houses and see if I got a response. And I'm like, I'm not the patient type. I could just see I could see myself printing out 20 of these things, mailing them out. And what's going to happen? It's going to go on someone's desk. They're going to give it a look and they go, yeah. And then even if I do get a response, it's going to be months down the road where I could be making money doing this. So that was first thing. I said, okay, I'm going to self-publish. So how do I self-publish? And I read and read and read and read. And it was a conglomerate of opinions that I figured out how to put a book together as cheaply as possible, but as professional as possible. And for authors out there, you're going to Google and you're going to see all these companies that are going to tell you for $5,000, for $10,000, for $2,000, we're going to do everything for you. We're going to, some companies even say, oh, we're going to give you a ghostwriter. Listen, don't take this the wrong way, people out there. If you're a nobody, you don't need a ghostwriter. You're already a ghost. You know what I mean? I love when you see these politicians and stuff and you're like, they put a book together in the middle of a pandemic. If you really think that guy wrote that book, all right? Yeah. And you're not going to get that ghostwriter either, okay? You're going to get some clown, you know what I mean? That's going to try to put your book together. You know your book, you know your material. Don't do it. Don't be lazy. Do it yourself. Write it down. Get your material together. For me, when I'm ready to start the process to get it together, I'm usually my books usually go between 225 and 240 pages, which is between 60 and 70,000 words. Mm-hmm. Okay. So once I have that content and I've gone through it and gone through it and gone through it, know where I want the chapters to fall and everything. Now I got to get an editor. Okay. So like I said earlier, don't go to one of these services that promises everything and you just hand over your baby and they're going to have a book for you. Because guess what? 9 out of 10 times, you're not going to have the publishing rights and you're not going to make a lot of money writing a book. Okay. You're just not. You're going to get a steady, if you know how to market it right and you put a nice book together, you will get a steady stream of income. But unless you hit a home run, you're going to make money, but you're not going to make money, if you know what I mean. So don't fall for these companies that's going to do everything for you and they're going to market it for you. They're not. They're going to take their money. They're going to screw you. And for the $2.25 you're going to get for a paperback on Amazon, guess what? They get $1.12. So what I did was I found a company. It's called ebook.launch.com. They're kind of an a la carte company. So when I have my book together, right, I go to ebook launch and a book cover for me. And as you can see, like my book covers, they're professionally done. There's a backing, you know what I mean? They put the whole thing together. There's a book blurb on it. There's about the author. For $500, they put together for me an ebook image for Amazon and a paperback image. And these guys are great, like NYPD Law and Disorder. I sent them an email and I said, this is what I want. I want a picture of a police car that's been in some sort of accident. I want a guy fleeing out of the back seat and I want a cop scratching his head. And they put that together on the first shot. They changed the fonts around and stuff. But for $500, you get a really well done professional book cover. What they also offer is a copy edit and a proofread. And I'm telling you, I get that you were an English major. Give the damn book to someone else to edit it. I'm telling you now, you could be a grammar Nazi. You're going to miss stuff. Go through it as much as you can. You know, get weeded out the best you can. And what they'll do is you send it out for a copy edit for my books, all in for editing. It's about $1,700 and I'll send it out. About 3 weeks later, I get my book back and it's got all the changes done to it and I can accept or decline the changes. Now, copy editors usually don't get sarcasm because they're very literal people and my books are very sarcastic. So I'll get a note, I don't understand this, or, you know, because a lot of times I'll say a Tai Chi latte instead of chai tea latte. And like, I don't get that. Have you not been to a Starbucks? I'm like, no, it's Tai Chi. So they don't get it. That's fine. I accept or decline the changes. After I'm happy with that, I send it off again for a copy, a proofread. And a proofread, they go through it line by line grammatically just to make sure it's 100%. Once I get that book back, now it's got to be formatted.
Right.
So you just can't take your book and shove it into Amazon and ta-da! It doesn't work that way. It's got to be formatted so that when a reader looks at it, it lines up and the words aren't crazy. Right. So it has to be formatted for ebook and it has to be formatted for paperback. So that's usually about another $178. So all in for one of my books is $2,500. Wow. And my mission in life is to make that money back in the first year. Now I don't always get there. That's the second stage authors make. They put out a book and they go, it's not selling. That's on you. I mean, my books are pretty successful, but you always see PR in them. And I watch them trend. And if one isn't doing well, I'm like, you know, I'm pumping air into it. People like yourself are nice enough to put me on this forum. I'm going to spend an hour or two with you. If 4 or 5 people buy my book and enjoy it, they're going to tell their friends. So do as many podcasts, do as many interviews as you can. Go on Facebook, drop your link, drop your book links, join all these book clubs on Facebook, Kindle Unlimited, Goodreads. There's hundreds of them on Facebook, all these book groups with readers that are dying for material. And you write out a little blurb about your book and you drop the link and your cover comes up and people click on it. And that's how you get sales.
Wow. That's like very organic kind of grassroots growth, which is awesome. That's what people dream of.
Anybody can do it. It's just, you have to put in the time. It's the same as you see people that's got a realtor's license and they never sell a house. Just because you wrote a book, you've got to get out there, go online and see if there's local television or local, especially if you're in a small market, like these radio stations, these little AM radio, people are dying to get you on there. They're dying for guests. And
Right.
don't be, oh, I'm not going to do that. Nobody listen. You never know. You
Yep.
just never know. I mean, you could go on, in 2 years from now, I could see you on Access Hollywood or something. And, like, hey, Vic, you want to be a guest on my show? You know what I mean? So never turn down something. If someone's going to give you an opportunity to promote your book, take it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good rule for most things. Absolutely. Say yes. Definitely. Did you find, so you've obviously done a lot of research on, the whole marketing end of it, like how to put the book together, not just the writing process, but, really the business end of it. Did you find, and you said you just have to go out there, put your book out there everywhere you possibly can.
Guerrilla warfare. Yeah, get it out there.
Did you feel like in the beginning that was kind of daunting for you, or did that come very naturally to you?
It was a necessary evil. I mean, I enjoy doing this interview, but I wrote books for the money and the enjoyment. I don't necessarily want to be famous. It's I have a hard enough time walking an Irish wolfhound without getting stopped. It's a lot of work. I mean, it really is. It's a part of my life now. I get up in the morning and I'm dropping ads on Facebook. I'm tweeting. Believe it or not, it's free for, if you've got a book out here, here's a little trick that I figured out on my own. Go on Craigslist and create an ad for your book. You can't put your book link in there, but you can put the photograph of the book, write a blurb about it, now available on Amazon, and drop it in large markets. So if you go on Craigslist in Los Angeles, my book is there.
Wow, that's interesting.
It's free, and what's funny is sometimes, and I know it's older folks, I'll get an email. How do I go about buying that book? And like, I always write them a nice note. Thank you so much for your interest. Unfortunately, I don't sell the books. You got to go to Amazon.com and just type in the book title. And you usually, some get pissed off at you, but most of the time they're nice. They'll, oh, thank you so much. But yeah, just create a Craigslist ad in books, put it in a market. I research the populations and the demographics, and I'll drop the link in there, and then someone's looking at books or garage sales, and they go, what's this? Grand Theft Auto. Is that the game? They'll click on it. Now available on Amazon, Grand Theft Auto, everything you wanted to know about the NYPD's auto crime division. So it's free advertising. It's out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you just started, like, I'm really curious about this process because it sounds very intuitive for you. But I think a lot of people don't know where to go. I mean, they might know to join a Facebook group, but they wouldn't necessarily know to go on Craigslist. Like, how did you figure all that out?
I'm relentless. I think that's what made me a good detective.
Yeah.
Again, I never took no for an answer. You know what I mean? So I just keep pushing. You know what I mean? It's like Pinterest, it frustrates the hell out of me. I don't really understand it. I figured out how to do the ads. It's so damn complicated, but I know there's people out there with entirely too much money that will spend money on a book. So I've done a lot of Pinterest ads, and I get a lot of feedback through Pinterest, but I don't really understand it. And I have to spend a day now that I just really have to know the ins and outs of it. Like, I figured out Facebook and I figured out Twitter.
Right.
You just got to keep going at it, and then just Google articles, and just, you'll know if you're going through something and the guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and you know more than them, get rid of that article, go to the next article.
It sounds actually like a lot of your detective work has
That's exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's sleuthing, it's research.
Yeah, I use my superpowers for good.
Good. We need that. We really do need that. You should always use your powers for good. Absolutely.
I always say I lost my superpowers after I retired, because now I drive the speed limit. I wear my safety seatbelt. It's funny, my New York friends, they'll come down and just visit me, like, drive like an old man now. I'm like, I'm not screwing around down here.
Fair enough. Yeah, I learned that the hard way. I got a couple of speeding tickets in college, and I now I drive more like a grandma. But
I hear you.
They were big lessons, so we don't do that anymore. Everybody has to learn their lessons, and that's why crimes should be punished, because people need to learn their lessons.
Definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. So I have a couple of more questions for you. Sure. What do you think what are like the biggest, you talked a little bit about, you want people to realize that cops are human. So that was one of the big takeaways you want people to have. Are there any like big lessons that you hope people are imparted from your books?
I think people would be amazed at what goes on behind the scenes and the calls you go on and the judgments you have to make in split second decisions. It never ends. It's, people think a lot of times cop are antisocial. That job burns you out. I mean, think about if, you got a job and people just keep coming to you with their problems. And, you go on a dispute, and it doesn't necessarily have to be domestic. It could be between two neighbors. You've got only a certain amount of time to make a ruling or a decision. And sometimes even the person that called you isn't going to be happy because they think, can't you see what this person's doing to me? Or why wouldn't you see it my way? And you don't necessarily, and, you leave and no one's ever happy. I mean, it's rare. It really is. It's rare. I've recovered people's stolen cars and they're not happy. Like, oh shit, you got my car back. And if I would have gotten the car back in another 3 days, the insurance would have cut me a check for a new car. You know what I mean? I've had that happen where they're upset with me that I recovered their car before the 30 days. Oh yeah. So it's a thankless job in a lot of ways, but I never let it get me down. I just didn't. I mean, I was just having too much fun with it. I guess it's my personality.
What about it was fun for you? Yeah, it does sound like you really enjoyed it.
Oh, it was like having a front row seat at the circus. There's just things going on left and right. In the office, there's crazy stuff going on. The people you're encountering, there's crazy stuff going on. No 2 days are ever the same. Okay, I'll give you a story from the NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crime, and Chaos. I get this big talking to by my sergeant and my lieutenant. I had made a couple of arrests that had nothing to do with auto crime. I walked into a gambling den. I made a bunch of arrests. They got pissed off at me. So they said, stick to auto crime. I don't care what it is, auto crime. I says, okay. So do you know what a Vespa motor scooter is?
I don't think so. Yeah,
expensive little Italian motor scooters that these hipster schmucks are driving around with all over the time. Anyway, They tend to leave them out and they get stolen. So my sergeant came up to me and he goes, do me a favor. We're losing a bunch of these Vespa motor scooters. They're getting stolen up in Manhattan. Can you find out who's taking them and where they're going? I go, all right. So I go on the computer and I find out that a kid got arrested with a stolen Vespa up in the Bronx, in this neighborhood in the Bronx. So I figured, okay, the bikes are probably somewhere in that neighborhood. If I go up to that neighborhood, I'm going to see a bunch of guys driving around the Vespas. That's the gang who's stealing the Vespas, right? So I go up this neighborhood in the South Bronx off of the Grand Concourse, and I figured it's all apartment buildings. Let me talk to the superintendents of these buildings, and they'll let me go down into the basement. And in the common area underneath underneath the buildings, you'll have where people store their bicycles or snow blowers or equipment they don't want up in their apartment. Building by building, the supers are like proud. They'll lead me into their kingdoms. They're giving me tours. They're showing me shit I don't even want to see, but okay, fine. The last building I go to, the super, he looked like Tattoo from Fantasy Island. Nervous wreck. He's dropping the keys. See. And I'm like, is it okay if I take a look in there? Yeah. Nervous wreck. And I'm like, there's something behind door number 2 he doesn't want me to see, but he's being compliant. So I'm going to take yes for an answer. He opens up this common area, and Courtney, I kid you not, it was this room that went like the length of the building. On the ground, running around, had to be 50 to 100 roosters and hens running around the floors, right? Then stacked on pods, must have been the more aggressive cocks. They had roosters. It was a training ground for a cockfighting ring, right? So I go, holy shit. And the super's just looking at me. He's a nervous wreck. And I go, I know what this is, but I'm an auto crime detective, right? So I go, so I want to put him at ease. I go, any Vespa scooters, motorcycles? No. Okay. He's okay. It's okay. You sure? Yeah. So he's like, right? He locks it back up, right? I go upstairs. I get on the cell phone. I call my sergeant. I go, listen, I just stumbled on to like this huge cockfighting ring. I go, I know what you told me. He goes, Vic, I don't want to hear it. I go, tell the lieutenant. He goes, he's the one that told me to tell you nothing but auto crime. He goes, call the ASPCA. I go, are you sure? He goes, yeah. I said, all right. So I call up the ASPCA. Do you remember there used to be that television show, Animal Precinct on Animal Planet? It was like this television show on like the Animal Planet show or whatever. It was all these cops from the ASPCA and they would rescue animals. Well, I get the guy on the phone, like I recognize his voice. Like I used to put that on to put me to sleep because it was mindless. And here I am talking to a guy that used to put me to sleep. And I tell him about it. And he goes, oh, wow. Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. He goes, I'll tell you what, we're going to do some research. When we hit the place, I'll give you the heads up and you can get in on the search warrant. I go, perfect. About a week later, true to his word, this guy from the ASPCA calls me up because we're going to hit the place tomorrow. I go, I can't. I'm putting up a fence with my dad in the backyard. I can't, but thank you. Okay. Next day, it's in all the New York papers. Largest cockfighting ring in New York City history busted in the Bronx, right? So I come into the office and my sergeant is like shoving the newspaper. He goes, why didn't you get in on this? Why didn't we get in on this? Right. So, and he makes the mistake. He should have kept his mouth shut because my lieutenant knew nothing about this. He tells my lieutenant. Now my lieutenant calls me and goes, this could have been great for us. This could have been, now all of a sudden I'm the scumbag because I didn't want to get involved in this. And I go, and that's the chapter of that book called It's Not Auto Crime, because I was looking for Vespa motor scooters and I run into this huge cockfighting ring and then I get in trouble for not disobeying their wishes and going along with it. So you're never right in that job. You're just not.
Yeah, apparently. You're like, yeah. So we're unhappy that you followed what we asked you to follow. So
they wanted to get in on the press conference.
Right. Wow. Crazy. Yeah, I guess a lot of people would never imagine the kinds of things that you would actually witness.
Yeah, it's like you talk about never take no for an answer. So I had a camera on this garage that I was trying to get license plate numbers. It was a chop shop. So I wanted to get, as the cars were going in, get the license plate. Then the car would never leave. And I wanted to get a search warrant to hit the place. And the way the angle was in our camera, there was a couple of cars that went in. I couldn't get the license plate number. I just couldn't. So I brought it down to our tech guys at One Police Plaza. It was, I'm dating myself. This is like 1998, 1999. I had a VHS tape, right? So I bring it down to our tech guys and they're screwing around with it. And they go, no, nothing could be done. I go, you sure? Yeah. So we're heading back up to the Bronx. And I told my partner, I go, you know what? I says, our tech guys, we got shit from like the 1800s. Go to 57th Street where they filmed 60 Minutes. So I go up to CBS Studios. I talk to the security guard, right? He lets me in. The next thing you know, I'm sitting in a studio where they filmed 60 Minutes. And the people that worked there couldn't be nicer. They took my tape, and I didn't know what digital was back then. They took my tape. They enhanced it. They're blowing up the plate and yada, yada, yada. I was able to get the license plate number. So that's what I'm like, never take no for an answer. Like, my own department couldn't help me, but the crew from 60, behind it, it's not like Dan Rather helped me, but it was like the crew from 60 Minutes helped me,
Wow. But your crew couldn't help you.
The NYPD, they didn't have the technology at the time.
Oh,
I'm sure they do now.
Yeah, I'm sure they do now. Oh, that's really interesting though. That's who stepped in to help you, and the NYPD didn't have technology. Yeah.
Well, that's what, telling the writers out there, never take no for an answer. Go left and right if straight ahead there's a roadblock.
Right. Yeah, sure. I'm curious why they didn't, the technology existed. So I'm curious why they didn't have it.
Well, we didn't have it. What, are you kidding? We're lucky we had latex gloves. There's a whole chapter in one of my books about the stuff. A trunk of a police car is like the Bermuda Triangle for the unexplained disappearances of equipment. There's a whole chapter on that about, so the plexiglass shields usually go missing and they turn up in Rockland and Orange County where kids are skiing, are using them to snowboard. The lasso poles usually wind up in a bar to lasso unruly drunks. The Polaroid cameras, I'm dating myself. The Polaroid cameras usually showed up at like precinct club meetings to take embarrassing photos. It's like the shit that went in those, the equipment went in the trunks. It just would get appropriated for something else.
Wow. Yeah. So out of just disorganization, or was it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, and my other question for you would be, what kind of advice do you have for people both looking to get into law enforcement and people looking to become an author?
If you're going to get into law enforcement and you're young, all right, and I'm sure you grew up on Facebook, Instagram, Snapface, and whatever else is out there, the internet is written with a pen, not a pencil. So, if you wrote something stupid or ridiculous and now you want to become a cop or go into law enforcement, I would go into all your thing and remove a lot of stuff. These kids out there, they post all this stuff. The first thing an investigator is going to do when he sees you, they're going to look through your social media because it's there.
Right.
So if you're posting ridiculous shit, it might cost you a job. Keep your opinions to yourself. Not everybody has to know them. Keep your nose clean. And if you do get into law enforcement, keep your ears open and your mouth shut. You don't know anything, and the people around you will educate you and school you and, make you a better police officer. As far as an author, don't write in chronological order, especially if you're not trained to write, and just, pick something that's what you want to write. Where the story's going. Go for the easiest thing. Go for the thing that you enjoy most about this story. This way it doesn't frustrate you and you're sitting there scratching your head. How am I going to do this? Go to something enjoyable. Right? I mean, it's the same in life, right? We tend to do things that please us. It's if you got a neighbor that every time you talk to him, it's like he dragged a dead dog in the room, you're going to cross the street to avoid him. Whereas the guy or woman across the street that's upbeat, that isn't into your business, that says hello and might offer some interesting story or advice, you're going to gravitate to them. You know what I mean? So pick and choose when you're writing, especially when you're new at it. Go for the things that are enjoyable to you.
Yeah, that's great advice. And then from there, you start working on things that are more difficult for you?
Yeah, I mean, towards the end, like I said, what I struggle with too, about the author. And, I don't like writing about myself per se. So what I've kind of turned it into a game is each one of my books, I write a little autobiography that's totally ridiculous. Like one of them I split my time between Disney Springs and a timeshare in North Korea. Now, what's funny is not everybody gets my humor and goes, how did you get a timeshare in North Korea? I'm like, you watch the news that no one lives in North Korea. You know what I mean? So I always will pick something about my life. There's a truth in it, but I just kind of tweak it and put something interesting. But I don't like writing about myself per se, like what I'm doing and things. So I don't particularly think I'm that interesting other than my police stories. But I struggle with that in the beginning and the end of a book. I've got all, the best part of it. And then I've got to get you to understand why this is great and why. And that's another thing. When you're writing a book, especially first author, put the best, the most explosive stuff up front. You want to hook them in. Because I made that mistake with my first book, and I kind of tended to put the better stories in the back. Put the good stuff up front. Will hook them. Like Grand Theft Auto, right? Stories from inside the New York City's auto crime division. There's a story in there where we hit a junkyard out in Queens, and we had a search warrant, and my partner finds a hand grenade in a shoebox. And he's parading around the office, showing everybody this hand grenade. And, this is a pineapple hand grenade. It's from the Vietnam War. He was a cook in the Army. Wasn't like a demolitions expert, right? And I go, where are you going with that? He goes, I'm going to pull the pin and throw it in Jamaica Bay, which that area was run by the mafia. No one would ever call the police. And as funny as that sounds, I go, we could make a lot of overtime if we call the bomb squad and they show up with all their toys. So I had to talk him into putting the grenade back in the shoebox. I went outside and I told my lieutenant, and he had a shit fit. Okay, all right, everybody out, back up. The next thing you know, there's a helicopter hovered above, news trucks are showing up. And they took, a guy in a spacesuit who looks like an anteater comes, walking over and takes the grenade out, and they brought it out to Rodman's neck and they detonated it. So I thought that was an interesting story. Or like people would say, how the hell would that even happen? But it did. In my other book, there's a story on, we got called to a short stay motel, and there was an elderly couple having sex, and they were having so much noise. They were making so much noise that we got there, and I banged on the door, and the woman yelled. I don't want to say your show, but it was so I tend to put the explosive, funny stuff to get people to go, oh wow, this is going to be good. I want you to know that it's good.
Right? Yeah, sure. Hey, hook them in, like you said. Find the hook and reel them in. Absolutely. So this one's a kind of more of a serious question, but I just moved, and I where I was living, I noticed a drastic increase in crime over the time that I had lived there, and it was kind of accelerating in the the months right before I left. And I had experiences personally. I think a lot of my audience knows my phone I had like phone wallet kind of case thing, and I was literally talking on it, and it was stolen from my hand as I was speaking in broad daylight.
Wow.
In a very nice neighborhood. And I was super, super lucky. Like I started running after this guy who was really fast. He probably should have geared his energies toward training for the Olympics. That would have been a more useful,
Right.
useful energy spent. But I realized pretty quickly I couldn't chase after him, so I started screaming. I actually lost my voice. I did a podcast like
that's a very good idea.
I screamed, and I started pointing. I described what he was wearing. I'm like, get that guy. He stole my phone, get after him. People literally got in their cars. It was amazing. Got in their cars. One guy got on his bike, chased him down, retrieved my belongings. And yeah, it was broad daylight. People were clapping and cheering. It's crazy.
To catch him, or just you got the belongings back and that was it?
I did. And so now I use a phone that has like a strap.
That's great.
I don't know. That could be dangerous too. They hurt me to get my property. But what was interesting to me was that in that experience, people were so struck by the fact that I screamed, that I reacted. I called the cops. The liquor store right next door, I figured had a camera on the street and filmed all of it, and they did. I was right. We saw it. I called the police. They asked me, they said, do you want to press charges? I said, of course. I mean, this is a crime, and that's why I called you. I think crime should be punished. And their response was, oh, well, that's very brave. A lot of people just don't call us. And I was very baffled by that response. This is a very long-winded way of, sharing this story for a reason.
No,
but yeah, I'm curious what you think about this trajectory. I think certainly in cities, we are seeing a rise in crime right now. And what do you think that, what do you think can be done about it? And how do you think people, just the citizens, who might be potentially victims, can protect themselves?
Well, first of all, like, I know exactly what happened, and I hate to say this, but they were trying to get you not to press charges.
Yeah, no.
For him to say you're very brave, that's kind of leaning on you, like, you should think twice about doing it. Here's a dirty little secret in law enforcement. This actually started under Giuliani. I can speak to the New York City Police Department.
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Okay, but I see it happening all over the country. So when crime was out of control in New York City, they implemented this program called CompStat. Okay, CompStat is holding precinct commanders accountable for what's going on in their zone or precinct or whatever. Okay, so crime is tracked with pin maps, and okay, we've got 13 robberies in this zone, we should flood this zone, and it's all statistic driven. It's almost like fantasy football or fantasy baseball. Okay, so what happens is once a month or every other month or however they do it, say for the Bronx, for instance, they'll say, okay, the Bronx has CompStat. So in the Bronx, you had 12 precinct commanders. 12 precinct commanders and their lackeys go down to one police plaza. We have all the chiefs, the police commissioner, all these people, and they put the stats up on the thing, and they'll say, okay, 50th precinct, step up. And you've got, and they'll have pictures. They have a group of guys that'll go out and take pictures and stuff, and they'll flash a photo up on the screen. You got all these homeless people in Sector George. What are you doing about it? And you've got 13 stolen cars in this zone. What are you doing about it? So what do the precinct commanders do? they start playing with the numbers because nobody wants to get their balls broken. See, these guys, they want to get promoted. If they're going down to these CompStat meetings and they're getting beat up over their numbers, they don't want to get relieved of their command, and they want to be a chief someday or an inspector someday. So they don't want to get beat up or embarrassed or forced to retire. So what they'll do is, the way I love when they say, well, the crime statistics are down. That's not true. They're not reporting it. And I used to see it where I would come across something and I would go into the system and report a car stolen or something, and I get a phone call from somebody from a precinct. Did you enter a stolen car in the system? Yeah. Oh, well, I read the report. That looks more like unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, a misdemeanor. I go, no, it's not. It's stolen. It's a $30,000 car. Yeah, but I don't want to take the number. You're going to have to take that number. So it boils down to crime reporting. They don't want to admit the problem. And CompStat, which worked at first, CompStat worked great. The problem with the NYPD is it's like a form of chemotherapy where they don't know when to take their foot off the gas. If you got cancer and you get chemo and you're cancer free, you stop the chemo. Yeah. What the NYPD does is they double down. Well, you had 15 arrests for this 1 month. This month, you only have 7 arrests because there's not as many people dealing drugs. So then they just keep flooding it. And that's how you piss off the community, and then that boiled down into summonses, because then they got hooked on the summons numbers. And it would be, you'd have, a training sergeant with 8 when I was a rookie cop, they would drop us off on foot posts all over the city by ourselves. And we figured it out. And if you didn't have an answer, you couldn't figure something out, you call for the training sergeant, he would show up and he would guide you. Nowadays, because they're so hell-bent on the numbers, they'll fill a van with those 8 rookie cops. They'll drive around. They'll see a guy drinking a beer in front of a building. The van will stop. 8 guys get out to stretch their legs, and they're giving this guy a summons. Someone looks out their window, and there's 8 cops, and one guy's getting a beer drinking summons, who, oh, by the way, is the super of the building, who's been telling you that people are selling drugs in his building. Now you just pissed that guy off. He's never going to call you again, and you just banged him with a $50 ticket. They never know when to take their foot off the gas with some of these programs. And what happened to you is they didn't want to admit they've got, and that sounds like a robbery, or depending on how we did it, a grand larceny. They don't want to take that number. So if you don't press charges,
right,
that's it.
Why don't they want to take down that number? I think that's the part that I didn't catch.
Well, they don't want the number because it looks bad for them. And then they got to admit there's a problem. And then the politicians, when they say crime is down because no one's taking the reports.
This is
like I said, like I was speaking to earlier about like the Bronx. Okay.
Yeah.
You get locked up with a stolen car in the Bronx, you're not going to jail. Chances are you don't even spend like 2-3 days in jail. I locked up guys, the ignition's punched, and I'll grab somebody driving a stolen car. Yeah, but we don't really know he stole that car because the car was stolen 48 hours ago. He could have just found it. Well, that doesn't matter. He's still driving a stolen car. We're going to charge the misdemeanor. They would D it out. Or sometimes if you stop somebody and they had the keys for the car, well, the ignition's not punched. Yeah, well, the complainant stated they left their car double parked and running and someone jumped into the car. Yeah, but she can't describe him. Well, yeah, but it's the same day. He's got the keys for the car. We're going to charge the misdemeanor. They do that because they don't want to go to trial. Because if they go to trial in a place like the Bronx, they might not get that conviction. More often than not, they would, but they don't want to go through the effort of doing it. If the guy takes a misdemeanor, they can put that down as a conviction for their conviction rate. So when the district attorney trots out there, and this is any jurisdiction, because that guy in Los Angeles seems like this is what he's doing, and he'll say, I got a 96 percentage conviction rate. Yeah, because you're pleading everything down and people are taking pleas. You're not taking that to trial.
Wow, it makes sense. It's terrible. It's really terrible, and it's perpetuating the problem. That's just, now people think that the crime is down, and so they don't have as much enforcement in place.
Yeah, but guess who figures this out? The criminals.
Right. Exactly.
When they say, well, violent crime is down. I do believe violent crime is down, but you know why? Because identity theft is up. that same guy, first of all, if you're an armed robber, that's your thing, right? No one holds cash anymore. You know what I mean? The days of robbing a supermarket or this place, because everyone's paying with plastic, so the cash isn't on hand. So if you get caught with a gun pointing in someone's face, you're going to jail. But if you figure out to get in with a group of guys that's installing swipes on bank ATMs or the gas station thing, or figuring out a way how to get your credit card information, or through a variety of ways, your information, and burning through your credit card. And think of it this way: you ever tried? I'm knocking wood because I don't want it to happen to me. But I've known people, and I've been the victim of identity theft, and no one wants to take that report. Good luck with that. Well, the card was used here, and blah blah blah. So you get pushed and bounced around.
Yeah.
No one wants to take the report.
No, and that I witnessed, some people close to me with some identity theft recently. It was through bank, and that was really hard to get anybody to do anything about. And they even said, well, it's been resolved now, but they had said that it may not even be their responsibility. Well, we'll see what we can do.
That's reassuring, isn't it?
That's really, this was not like, a credit card fraud is, bad enough, but this was within a bank. So it's really scary. It's really scary. Yeah. So, what do you think what do you think can be done about this? Do you think that there's anything people can do to protect themselves? Do you think there's anything, within the system? Maybe speak to New York, since you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm an expert on auto theft, but change your passwords often. When you go to a gas station, you're going to use your card. Make sure there's a seal around the pump. Pull on those things, those swipes, at the ATM, or pull on it. Make sure there's not like a plastic thing glued over it. Look to see if there's some type of epoxy, because they'll glue those things over it. And if you put your card in one of those things and it doesn't work, go to the manager. Say, hey, listen, I just tried using pump number 3 over there. Something's not right with it. I'd like you to come out here and take a look with me. I think there might be something there. And I've had that happen where they come out and pull the thing off, because they don't want to get burned either.
Oh, that's wow.
Unless they're in on it.
I would never have even known that. That's amazing. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, you just got to be, to quote my late mother, you got to be vigilant. You have to, change your passwords. Don't share information. Somebody like yourself, you're out there, you've got a profession, and I hope to God I'm wrong, but if your password is trapeze1, you know what I mean? Like, so, you should put something else, like Mary had a little lamb. I don't know, whatever you want to do. Go inside. My dog is go inside. You're making me laugh.
That's funny. Yeah, no, trapeze1. No, I think that's we're pretty safe on that. Well, this was awesome. Do you have anything else you would like to leave us with? Tell us about closing remarks, and definitely tell everybody where they can find you and where they can read your books, where they can buy your books and read them.
Sure. I've written, like I said earlier, 4 NYPD books. I'll hold them up. NYPD Law and Disorder, Grand Theft Auto, the NYPD's Auto Crime Division, which is everything you wanted to know about the stolen car industry and were afraid to ask. There's schemes, how to break into cars, how to steal cars, how to protect your car from being stolen, and just the interesting criminals and car chases I got involved in. The NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crime, and Chaos. That's a lot of wild stories that happened in my career, guys I work with. There was a guy that I knew that stole a horse and carriage and took off through Central Park with it, with a couple of prostitutes in the back of it. And what's even funnier is he was drunk. He got into that horse and carriage, and it took off into Central Park. Well, the horse knows that there's an idiot behind the wheel or behind the reins, and took off into Central Park. And then like 2 other horse and carriage guys go, hey, wait a minute, that's Larry's horse and carriage that's been stolen. So it turned into like the Trotters. It was like a chariot race or something. They kind of cut him off in Central Park, and they got the horse to stop. And the 2 prostitutes took off and ran off in different directions. And the guy that I knew ran to an ATM and gave the guy $500, and it went away. This is like in the late 80s, early 90s. And And then you got NYPD Through the Looking Glass, stories from inside America's largest police department. There's a lot of wild stories like that in there too. There's a story about a guy I used to work with that he lived in a bad neighborhood and he wanted to safeguard his gun. He thought that no one would look, his oven. He went out, had a couple of drinks. He returned back to the apartment 4 hours, 9 beers later, was hungry, decided to put on the oven, preheat the oven and make some frozen pizzas. He fell asleep on the couch. When you leave a gun in the oven, kids, and there's bullets in it, that heat will make the bullets explode. So the oven started shooting. Well, the gun in the oven started shooting at him. He had to run out of the apartment and call 911 on himself. And our emergency service guys had to go in there and get the gun that had blown up his microwave. So there's a lot of stories about cops doing some not so smart things. All my books, I try to keep the price point down. That's another thing. If you're a first-time author, do not ask for $15, $25 for your book. I know you think it's great and it might be great, but nobody knows who you are. $10 paperback. $10, that's the sweet spot. That's the most someone's going to invest on a paperback. And if you're doing an ebook download and you're over 200 pages, go $3. That's what I charge. $10 for my paperback and $2.99 for my ebooks. All my books are available on Amazon.
Awesome. And what would they look it up? Just look up under the titles and find it?
Yeah. You could look up any one of the titles that I said, or type in Vic Ferrari. There's another Vic Ferrari that wrote something about being in a hopeless marriage or something. That's not me. So don't buy that book, and then I don't want to catch shit that I didn't write that book. I have colorful. This is Dickheads and Debauchery and Other Ingenious Ways to Die. That's my first book. That's about the ridiculous things people do to shorten their life expectancy. So all my books are colorful. You'll figure it out. You've got a smart audience.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate it.